Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Mehrdad Hariri. I'm CEO and President of the Canadian Science Policy Centre and have the pleasure to introduce another exciting panel to you. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land that I am talking to you from. I am in Newmarket, Ontario, which is the traditional land and unceded territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. We recognize the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples across Canada and are grateful for the opportunity to gather and share knowledge on these lands. I invite our attendees to share their own land acknowledgements in the chat as we get started if they're interested. For the months of March and April, CSPC is presenting a number of panels to you, which you'll find more information about them on the chat, and please follow us on social media. But today's panel is Future Leaders in Canadian Brain Research, organized by Brain Canada Foundation. As global geopolitical dynamics and trade relationship continues to evolve, Canada of course, must strengthen its self-reliance in research and innovation. And today's panel features the early career researchers' perspectives to discuss this. Without any further ado, I want to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Fiona Sanderson. For over a decade, Fiona has been managing research funding in various roles, building expertise in Canadian academic, healthcare, and nonprofit sectors. Dr. Fiona Sanderson is managing Brain Canada's Future Leaders in Canadian Brain Research program, advocating for funding for early career researchers in Canada. Fiona, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Mehrdad. And welcome everyone to Future Leaders in Canadian Brain Research, building Canadian research shifting global landscape. I'm Fiona Sanderson. I work at Brain Canada, where our mission is to bring together funders and researchers to advance health innovations for Canadians. As global dynamics shift and cross-border research becomes more uncertain, the need for a resilient, self-sustaining Canadian research ecosystem has never been more urgent. Today's panel brings together leaders whose work spans research, discovery, commercialization, implementation, inclusion, and philanthropic strategy, all essential to building Canada's next generation of scientific leadership. We're going to begin with a round robin, so each panelist will offer a brief self-introduction, and then I'll call on each to respond to an opening question. After that, we'll move into a moderator-led group discussion featuring questions, and we would love to hear from you, our audience. So please put your question in the Q&A panel at any time over the course of this discussion. If your question or a similar question has all Q&A panel by someone else, please use the upvote option to help us prioritize topics of high interest. Let's get started. So I'm going to call on each panelist to introduce themselves to you. And first up, we have Dr. Cindy Barha.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Cindy Barha. I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of Calgary. I'm also an adjunct member of the Department of Cell Biology and Anatomy here. I'm a Canadian Research Chair, Tier 2 in Neuroscience, Brain Health and Exercise, and I'm currently in my third year of my first position. So I'm right in that middle part of that ECR window.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Next up, we have Dr. Grant Bruno.
Tanse Grant Bruno Nitsikasun Nipsikopak Gochinia. Hello, everybody. My name is Grant Bruno. I'm a member of Samson Cree Nation, which is on the Alberta side of Treaty 6 territory, about an hour south of Edmonton. First and foremost, I'm a father, and so I have neurodivergent children, which brings me into the brain research space. I'm an assistant professor in pediatrics at the University of Alberta, and as well as an early career researcher, so to speak, about a year and a half into my appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Next up, we have Dr. Aaron Phillips.
Hi, everyone. Aaron Phillips. I'm an associate professor in the Cumming School of Medicine here in Calgary. I'm also the Associate Dean Innovation and Commercialization in that role. I'm kind of at the tail end of my ECR phase, I'd say. But I pursued a lot of science in the space of spinal cord stimulation, during that period and also had some successful commercialization ventures. So I hope I bring that context to this panel today.
Thank you, Aaron. Next up, we have Dr. Allison Secular.
Hi, I am Allison Secular, and I am wearing a couple of different hats. My primary hat for today's conversation is President and Chief Scientist at the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. I'm also President and Chief Scientist and the Sandra Rotman Chair in Cognitive Neuroscience at the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education, and a professor in psychology at the University of Toronto, and also have a faculty position at McMaster University. I'm not an ECR. I have been an ECR in the past, and I do a lot of work supporting ECRs in a variety of those roles.
Thank you, Allison. Next, we have Dr. Véronique Dugas.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are now. Very pleased to be with you today. So I am Véronique Dugas, President and CEO of Securiam. I am a scientist by training. I have a PhD in immunology, complemented with an MBA, and I've conducted as well graduate studies in both program evaluation and corporate governance. I would say over the past 15 years, I've been involved a lot in the Canadian innovation space, focusing primarily on public-private collaboration and innovation policy. And I'm very pleased to be with you today to discuss this important topic.
Thank you, Véronique. And last up, we have Dr. Mira Puri.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mira. I'm the Scientific Director for Health, Science and Research at the Azrieli Foundation, which is one of Canada's largest funders of neuroscience. We've invested $675 million in science and healthcare in Canada and globally since 1989. I'm also a former researcher and was once an ECR myself at the University of Toronto. So the focus at the Azrieli Foundation is neurodevelopmental conditions, and we work across what we call the full continuum, from neurons to networks to neighborhoods. And that means really everything from fundamental neuroscience at the bench to clinical trials to community services for neurodiverse people. So critically for today's conversation, the early career researcher pipeline is a cross-cutting priority for the Azrieli Foundation, where we've supported over 100 Azrieli future leaders in the Canadian brain research through partnership with Brain Canada. And thank you so much to Brain Canada for organizing this panel. We've also made other contributions to training, fellowships, and funding for early career. And I just want to say it's very special to be on this panel alongside Grant Bruno, who was a fellow of a research training platform that the Azrieli Foundation co-created with the neurodevelopmental research community called. And seeing where that trajectory has taken him is a kind of outcome that we hope for when we invest in early career talent. So I'm here very much thinking about what philanthropy can do to make sure that the next generation of researchers has the best possible future in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. So before I move on to pose an introductory question to each of our panel members, we're going to have a quick poll coming across your screen, audience. So please take a moment to answer the poll questions while we move forward with our panelists. So I'm going to start with you, Cindy, and I'm going to ask you, how can Canada better support early career researchers working across disciplines like brain health and kinesiology, where siloed funding and training structures can limit innovation?
Oh, I mean, that's a great question. I would say working across disciplines is fairly tough here in Canada because we don't lack the interdisciplinary talent, and so that we can collaborate. It's more that we lack the infrastructure that would make interdisciplinary careers, I would say, sort of less risky. So ECRs a lot of the time, and I was one of them, was told to do high risk research, whatever that means. But I think what we forget is that we operate within this funding system and this evaluation system that isn't designed for that. It's designed for, to me, in my opinion, to conduct sort of in-depth research within one narrow discipline and not really designed to do integrative research across fields. And I mean, despite lots of ways, I think Canada could do a better job of supporting those of us that work across disciplines. But I think there's two things. One is that we could improve for sure our funding structure. So, for example, interdisciplinary proposals, a lot of the time are reviewed by panels with members from sort of like a single small discipline. So I think we need better training of our reviewers in this sort of interdisciplinary evaluation. And I think it's great to have more sort of dedicated cross-agency funding streams and even research priorities that are focused on cross-disciplinary research questions. And I think, I guess for me, the most important thing is to improve how we actually are going to be considering and evaluating cross-disciplinary research when we look at things like ECR, career progression. And so I say this because, in my opinion, in my experience, this type of research takes a long time. A long, long time. And that really slows down, for example, our publication timelines. And I saw this myself when I went from, really focused PhD in neuroendocrinology and rodent models, and I moved into more this transdisciplinary exercise neuroscience. The number of publications I had every year just kept going down, because it takes so long to do this. And so I think one thing we could do is maybe increase that early career window to accommodate this slower sort of interdisciplinary publication timeline that people like me do see.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That's really valuable, especially as a funder like Brain Canada. Let's move to Grant. So Grant, what would a truly inclusive and resilient Canadian research ecosystem look like for Indigenous early career researchers? And what structural changes are required to build that capacity?
Yeah, so something I've learned, and just talking with other colleagues who are in those kind of early career phases of their own journeys, is that Indigenous researchers, especially in anything science related, are hugely in demand. And that demand almost requires a different level of responsibility, both from the institutions and from funders and from these different, mechanisms that we kind of find ourselves in. And so one thing that I've noticed happens with many Indigenous scholars is we often don't do postdocs just because there's such a huge demand that universities often reach out to us to see if we're interested in becoming faculty early. And so this even happened for myself. My PhD, I was only in my second year when my own institution reached out and asked me if I wanted to become a faculty member. And my initial response to them was no, actually. I was in that very institutional phase of a PhD, doing ethics and coursework and all those pieces, and I wasn't having very much fun, right? I think that for me, anyways, the work that I do is very much community-based. I like being around people. I'm a relational human. It's, within my Cree worldview to do those types of things. But then I started doing the research. I started going, connecting with families and learning from them. And I quickly realized that maybe I can put up with the institutional demands to do the actual work in community and to be able to, connect and fill those gaps, and especially in the neurodevelopmental space for my own community. And so I reached back out to my university. I told them, I'm open to this, but I have very specific demands, right? I knew that as soon as I took that faculty position on, I was going to get overloaded with requests, with committee work, with everybody wanting to, connect and get little pieces of me that I knew I didn't have. And so I knew pretty strong, I think, research package, and they were open to it. And so when I think about other Indigenous scholars and I hear about their experiences, they're not always the same, right? Some actually go through a very negative experience where they get all these demands and these requests, and they don't have a supportive chair or anything like that. And it becomes, they get overwhelmed and then they leave the institution because it's just too much. So I think it's important to recognize the funding mechanisms that go into that, as well as recognizing all the different roles that us Indigenous peoples often have to take on. For example, I'm the Director of Indigenous Health for my department. I'm the academic lead for the Indigenous Children's Health Research for the Women and Children's Health Research Institute. I'm the scientific advisor for the Kids Brain Health Network. I'm the co-chair for the Indigenous Advisory for the National Autism Strategy, right? So I'm only and I took most of these roles on in my first year, and and I'm always grateful for the opportunities, but there's such a large demand that as early career researchers, we're often told you got to say yes to things. when in fact I can't. There's absolutely no way, because then I end up doing everybody else's work and I can't focus on the work that is actually having impact with the families that I work with in community. Another piece to this, I think it's really important to acknowledge how colonialism has disrupted our lives, right? So I grew up under the Indian Act. I grew up with a residential school survivor for a mom, and my grandma's went to residential school. So there's been a lot of disruption in my family, and this creates another sense, a level of responsibility I have for my community. Just yesterday, I buried my uncle, who was only 61 years old, and so grieving and the responsibilities and the ceremonial pieces that I have to take on are usually above and beyond what most early career researchers need to do, and that needs to be taken into account, especially when it comes to metrics. And so something I actually did with my institution is I sat down with them and I told them, the ceremonies and the community work and the families that I work with and those, day-to-day interactions have to count towards the metrics when I go up for promotion. And they were open to it. And so I was able to actually put an entire line into my contract that said all the community work I do counts as research. And so, those little institutional changes where I'm challenging the system to ensure that my lived experience, which is integral to the work that I do to build connection with people, is being taken into account when I'm negotiating and I'm operating in these different, systems. And so, yeah, so I think it's important to understand that many of our indigenous worldviews, again, I'm Cree, but I know Anishinaabe people, I know Blackfoot scholars, we often want to operate in a relational way, which again, when you work in these institutions and these systems, is very difficult, right? We're often bound by funding deadlines. We're often bound by, different procedures and policies that the institution wants. And so it's really important, again, as people go into these, as they, move forward in their careers, to recognize that, as Indigenous peoples, we want to be relational. And so when you're making decisions on their behalf, or especially for non-Indigenous peoples, to take that relationality into account as you're building the program and policies in these institutions as well. Thank you.
Grant, I think that perspective is so valuable. I think we all feel ourselves being pulled in so many different directions, but without the perspective of what that might mean for someone else, it's hard to put that into context. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And for being such a strong advocate on your own behalf and your community's behalf, and good on University of Alberta for working with you on that. So thank you for that. Aaron, let's move to you. What shifts are needed in Canada's innovation and commercialization ecosystem to ensure that early career brain researchers can translate discovery into real-world impact, especially in a globally competitive and uncertain environment?
Yeah, thanks. This is like a huge topic, and I'll reflect some of my own personal opinions for 4 or 5 minutes on this. It's been interesting to learn from Grant and Sydney their perspectives and lenses through they see things. So I think in this space is that Canada's built this world-class discovery engine, right? Like we're top researchers, top per capita, but we do unfortunately have a weaker system than many countries for translation. We generate science at these big scales, but we don't convert that into companies and economic value. I think Stats Canada has some sort of statistic that actually calls it the innovation paradox, where strong research inputs really translate into subpar, modest productivity gains. One interesting tidbit, I'm just trying to set the stage in terms of how significant this is a problem, is business investment in research and development in Canada is 50% lower than the average of peer countries, so OECD countries, et cetera. And this kind of reflects the structure of our economy. We're more heavily weighted towards like natural resource estate and a little bit of finance. We don't have like big R&D companies to the same scale as a lot of countries. The countries we compare ourselves to have more large innovation-driven firms like biotech, advanced tech. And to be honest, these types of companies often come out of universities. So if we want to build investment, we want to build more companies that actually will increase that 50% gap. We need our university system and that ecosystem to change. And, you can see the consequences of this in the data, right? We've probably all seen these news articles that are finally starting to come out, but for the past decade, productivity growth has been essentially stagnant, with GDP per capita now lagging most G7 countries. I saw a study in the Global Mail yesterday that our youngest generation's happiness is declining dramatically, and that's in contrast to other countries. And one key factor is their feeling of financial stability. So I kind of think there's three things that could be done and really just essentially need to be done and need to be done yesterday and boldly. One similar to Sydney and Grant is that we need to align incentives internally within the university, right? This means rewarding not just publications and grants, but real world outcomes like partnerships, clinical adoption, company creation. We need promotion systems that value patents and large amounts of capital being raised inside people's startup companies, for example. We need to find translational career tracks. So for folks that right up front have a prioritization that they want to translate their findings into real world or economic benefit, so that early career researchers can pursue impact, which does take longer, without being penalized. We also need internal funding opportunities that are embedded into commercialization, that support that bridging the gap between discovery and application. I don't want to take too much of a tangent, but there's a lot of hesitancy from universities to have too much commercialization activity happening within the universities, for a variety of reasons, but largely due to provincial legislation that they're not-for-profit entities. In the same sense, the government then wants the universities to be economic drivers in the community. So that's a constant battle between those two policies and those two initiatives. And then, of course, we need simpler, faster intellectual property policies that make it easier to work with industry and build companies. I think it's clear from everything I've heard so far that we need to align the incentives with our outcomes. We can't expect early career investigators to not follow the incentive structure. And sometimes, like Grant did, it's about aligning your specific contracts incentives towards your goals. Second, we need stronger structured bridges between academia, industry, and health systems. We need folks that have regulatory expertise, implementation partners, early customers are critical. This is critical. We need standardized, faster partnership agreements so collaboration doesn't get slowed down. We need integrated translational hubs that include regulatory and reimbursement. Health systems need to act as active partners and early adopters. I think the last point is we need to improve our ability to scale, right? Canada produces these super promising companies, but very few grow into large, globally competitive firms. And there's some things that we can do to address this. Of course, way more domestic capital for scale up, particularly from institutional investors, so companies aren't forced to leave Canada to grow. One major thing we need, and I think, unfortunately, we didn't do this ourselves. We kind of were forced to do this by the US government, but we need to take initiative on adjusting our procurement systems, especially in healthcare and universities. I know too many early phase companies that are directly or indirectly told that they need to go prove their technology in the US, and then maybe they'll come back and get a contract here in Canada from, maybe where they developed it. We need to be very aggressive in this. One thing I want to say too is, like, we are so far behind on this that we can't look at the US and say, let's copy their model because that'll solve all our problems. We actually need to move the needle even further and play catch up to get to where they are now. So this is, it's affecting all age groups. And if we don't build these pieces, we'll kind of continue along this pathway of our research being totally world-class, batting way above our weight, but not leading to that economic impact that I think we're all wanting.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I think much of what you said, we're hoping to dig into. And I think our next couple of panelists can speak to at least a few of your points. So we're going to move forward to Allison. So, Allison, how can innovation accelerators better connect early career researchers to partners and pathways that support real-world implementation, like Aaron was talking about, of brain research?
Yeah, I think all of the speakers have really touched on some of the key elements, and the trick to all of it is that people shouldn't feel as though they're in this by themselves. And so CABI, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, is Canada's only innovation catalyst, specifically focused in this aging and brain health space. And our model is different from a lot of solution accelerators, which sort of take in a wide range of different kinds of companies with a broad range of foci at a particular TRL or technology readiness level and sort of, give them a space and then push them out. We work within this specific area of aging and brain health across all of the technology readiness levels from 3. So past sort of foundational research, but when you're ready to start translating things all the way through. So from design and develop through validate and refine, all the way through spread and scale and adopt. And so there are programs for everybody starting as students all the way through CEOs at every single one of those stages. And so we can actually take people and put them into clusters and help them connect with each other. But then also not just providing funding, but also providing supports. And I think what's really important is we always talk about precision medicine at Baycrest, which is where my main labs are. We talk about precision aging. And what we're talking about here is really precision innovation. Each individual needs something different, even if they're all at the same stage, even if they're all doing the same kind of thing. People come with different sorts of backgrounds. And so what we try to do in CABI is to make sure each person is getting exactly what they need at that stage for them, right? And so, yes, we will give funding. We've given we've invested over $200 million in funding since 2015, which has yielded, I should say, follow-on funding of over $1 billion within that short period of time, and led to hundreds of different innovations getting introduced into the ecosystem. But we don't just provide funding, we provide a whole sort of support system. And part of that is connecting innovators, early career innovators, with each other, and with a broader network of coaches and mentors, and making sure that they're also being connected with people at different sorts of levels. So some of our programs, for example, for early stage folks, we have our CABI Science Collaborative for scientists and researchers and trainees, including early career researchers. And really the goal there is building innovation skills and connecting research to real world impact, right? And so there's professional development training, there's hands-on, skill building, but there's also linking people with companies so they can kind of get a glance at what's that like before they decide to go there. Once somebody has a project that they want to do, there are programs that come in, but again, it's not just giving them money, it's connecting them as a cohort, and giving them the support that they need. So we've seen in this sort of a setup, being able to take people from, early stage researchers with an idea through becoming CEOs of companies, and I've taken them on trade missions and within like 3 or 4 years. And that's because it's a really focused sort of approach to it that can follow individuals throughout all of those stages, gives them what they need at those different times, recognizes that every single person is different, but also helps to connect folks so that they don't feel like they're just in this on their own. And the other thing that we think is really important is recognizing, as I think Grant highlighted, a lot of issues with community-based research not being recognized, but the importance of it. And the same thing, I'm an ally in the Canadian Black Scholars Scientists Network, same thing in those communities, same things in research with aging. We never want to be doing something to or for a group. It always should be by and with that group. And so just as in work that we've done, in collaboration with Indigenous scholars or Black scholars, nothing about us without us. We think the same thing is true. Anything working with patient populations, community populations, we really want to make sure that we're taking that patient engaged approach. And so that's the other thing. I think recognizing that you as an innovator and early career researcher, you have people, as Cindy was saying, from different disciplines that you can connect with. As Grant was saying, you've got people from the community that you connect with. As Aaron was saying, your university or your hospital, where a lot of this innovation work also takes place, those have support groups like CABI and Azrieli and others. We all have supports, and we're coming together. But I think really the most important support group you should be working with is whoever your end user group is. And so at CABI, we have a LEAP platform, so you can, at every single stage of your research and innovation, policy development, et cetera, you can be engaging with people who are going to be the end users, which then leads you more towards success. And so just recognizing the wide range of these different partners that you have, and why you might need different ones at different times. The other thing I just want to mention for folks who are embarking on this sort of approach is, in addition to groups like CABI, who can help in this translational journey with funding and support, there's also in Canada a really wonderful group that I work with called the Creative Destruction Lab, which doesn't necessarily provide funding, but can provide for companies that are a little bit further along circles of mentorship. And again, it's taking that idea that what you need at a certain time is going to be different. And also given whatever your background is. So like right now I'm working with a company, and I'm sort of serving as in this particular case, guiding them on the science. Someone else is coming in and guiding them on information, and someone else is guiding them on how to get financing. We could all overlap, but we each have our own specific roles. And then 2 months, previously they had a different set of mentors. So it's not that you should just have a mentor. You're going to need different kinds of supports, but also working together as a group. So I think we're really blessed in Canada having, the foundation for this great ecosystem. I would totally agree with Aaron that we need to be doing more. And I think that we need to be recognizing that even the funding that we do have is often very much restricted to the people who set up the systems, who, happen to have been typically white Western males. And so when you look at the ability of women to gain funding and access to these sorts of approaches, or Indigenous peoples, or people from the Black community, people with disabilities, people in the 2L LGBTQIA plus communities, there's additional barriers that we have to recognize and make sure that, yes, we're investing more, but if we don't get everybody involved in innovation, Canada's not going to be able to succeed. So we have to make sure that we're really taking that equity approach to innovation is the last thing I just want to say.
Thank you so much, Allison. I think those are some really important bridges that we're starting to create, that you're starting to create from this discovery research through to translation, innovation, and impact. So I think we'll all be very happy to hear some more about that through the course of this panel. And I think our next panelist, Véronique, might have something to say about that as well. So Véronique, what must Canada do to ensure that academic discoveries have access to the pharma-specific mentorship, IP strategy, and market intelligence needed to cross the so-called valley of death and advance toward therapies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot for this important question. The on a lot of those points already, so I don't want to just repeat what's been said. But both Aaron and Allison's views resonate a lot with me, and this is also something we're trying to contribute towards at CQEM in partnership with other organizations like Brain Canada, for instance. And I think at this point we all agree that great science alone is not enough to actually develop a therapy or a viable health innovation that will be commercialized and will go directly to the patient. I think we have to acknowledge that we're seeing more and more early career researchers that have the interest and willingness of becoming researcher entrepreneurs, and this is a really, really positive shift. But it also comes with a number of significant challenge and a really, really steep learning curve. Because, researchers typically are trained to generate knowledge, not necessarily to navigate the very complex drug development reality and landscape. And so they need to learn all of that at a pace that is, difficult to maintain, actually. One thing I believe is important and can make a difference is around collaborative research. So I think it's actually a great way for early career researchers to be exposed early to industry reality without taking all the risks associated with the development of new therapeutics or research tools. At CQDM, this is something where we put a lot of emphasis. I think I was listening to Allison, and I think our organizations have a lot of sharing objectives, but we do that in different capacity and with different mechanisms. So for us, what we're trying to do is really create connection opportunities. So it could be in-person events organized around a specific theme of interest to industry, where we connect researchers in that space with companies that have real world challenges that they are facing. And one thing we're hearing a lot is, well, from Canadian industry, that they don't know how to access expertise within academia. They don't know who to turn to. And from the researcher, what we hear is that they'd like to get more opportunities to connect with companies and hear about those challenges and understand their reality. And so this is why I think it's 2 years ago we started to create more networking and partnering opportunities. We also connect Canadian researchers and startups with large pharma societies at the global level. And we do that in different manners, but one way that we implemented recently is what we call the Connect Pharma Call for Ideas. So Canadian innovators can actually present their technologies, the therapeutics that they're developing to pharma, and then both can engage into meaningful discussions. And it's a very important way for Canadian innovators to actually get very crucial feedback from pharma. Again, we're able to support collaborative research, so we can provide up to $1 million in funding for projects. And when we do so, we make sure that it doesn't only bring funding to the table, but brings the industrial reality, the mentorship aspect, so that researchers can actually develop that understanding of industry reality. I would say that another challenge we're seeing right now related to collaborative research is the fact that in Canada, the IP, I would say IP policy, IP management mechanism landscape is fragmented across the country and across institutions, making it maybe a bit more difficult for companies to collaborate with academia, because every time a partner change, well, everything has to be redone again, and negotiation may take a very long time to happen. And sometimes, very promising discoveries are left on the shelf. It's not possible to achieve an agreement between institutions and the private sector. So having, I would say, a more predictable, stable, harmonized way of managing IP in Canada would probably be something very, very useful. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Veronique. Yeah, I think I'm trying to see like recurring themes coming out about, bridging people. So it's not just about content and teaching, it's about networks and bringing people together to be able to really be able to solidify these pathways. So Mira, let's move to you. You're sort of our voice of philanthropy on this panel, no pressure. So, what role should philanthropy play in stabilizing Canada's research ecosystem and supporting early career researchers and trainees to foster talent development?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to represent philanthropy at this really important session. And I've really resonated with many of the comments that have come so far. But and I think I'll center my comments on the early career space and also, the dimensions in which philanthropy plays a role, and I can outline. And I think the first of those is really philanthropy's place in filling gaps, going to places where public funding cannot or has not yet. And this, examples of that are the interdisciplinary space that Cindy described earlier, and also focusing on areas of research that are sort of underdeveloped. And, one of our examples is our own science grants program was specifically designed to fill the gap in neurodevelopmental research funding that public granting can't cover as comprehensively as needed, really, for the vast frontier of discovery that's still needed in this area. And I think the other point and more to the point of early career support and training is another example from our work is that we invested in building capacity in translational research in brain health and medicine that's been missing. So an example is the Child Bright Network fellowships that we support are really specifically focused on developing a Canadian workforce in implementation science. This is relatively new terminology, I think, for many of us, but it goes hand in hand with the discipline of turning evidence into actual healthcare practice change. And we've used the word translation all along, which kind of depicts a one-way street. And others have mentioned the important relationality of this process, the people-centeredness of making changes to our healthcare system, but also in innovation, the kinds of networks that are needed to grow these sectors, and providing a bit of funding and access to those training grounds is, I think, a really critical and underfunded piece of the pipeline that really, I don't know, rarely gets named in terms of the human expertise that's actually needed to fulfill those goals that have been mentioned really well by Allison and Aaron and others on this panel. So the second role of philanthropy really is catalysis. So taking early risks strategically so researchers can stable funding and partners for their brilliant innovations. And we know that early career researchers have great ideas and originality. And so our philosophy is that supporting them means that we are likely directing our research dollars to breakthrough potential, but not necessarily the proven concepts, which is really where our innovation pipeline needs to be, right? And this strategy has proven successful because many of these research projects, for example, in the Future Leaders example, these projects have actually leveraged quite a lot of public dollars down the line. And in so doing, advances both the ideas and the careers and the networks of the people that have generated those ideas and innovations. And I think that maybe answers the stabilizing effect question originally. And then I guess a third thing that at the Azrieli Foundation we take really seriously is, and I think it is kind of underappreciated, is the life stability for people with this precious expertise. We really believe that providing jobs, in fact, is a key, important part of this pipeline. So our centers of excellence model, we have 5 in Canada. They aren't just about research infrastructure and project funding. They've produced faculty hires and promotions, and we help retain these folks in Canada. And so if we want early career researchers to build careers in Canada, they really need jobs and not just grants. So, that's an important element, I think, that quite seriously opening the doors to these maybe stable employment in academia or in other areas of the sector, and which is a broad sector for brain health. And finally, I just want to address maybe a point that I thought about after a couple of the comments, that there is some misalignment of how funding can flow. And Erin, your comments about sort of the tension between commercial development and innovation and the not-for-profit nature of, and I include ourselves here in philanthropy in that, as well as the universities. And as everyone knows, we're a charitable organization, and the destination of our funds have to be charitable organizations, which our universities and hospitals are. And so one of the tactics that we've used to try to build the innovation economy is to support more in-house innovation in the institutions. And an example of that is our Precision Child Health initiative across 2 hospitals in Canada, at Sick Kids and at Saint-Justine, where our efforts really are to drive innovative therapeutics and their trajectory across the valley of death internally, because that's where our funds can also be used. And we are actively looking for more opportunities to drive innovation within our institutions, to support that alongside the venture funding that's needed on more of that commercial front. So I will stop there, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mira, and thank you all. Before we move into the group discussion, results of our poll that we had put up. And thank you so much to those who participated. So for your interest, the results are coming up here. Yep, so I see that the majority find the challenge that affects most ECRs in Canada today to be limiting funding stability. And also the impact of brain research that most people feel would be meaningful to them is advancing earlier diagnosis and better treatments. But I see a diversity of opinions and different things being important to different people here in our audience. So thank you all for participating in that. So the next questions that are coming up reflect issues that are particularly relevant for early career researchers, and your insight may help them address challenges they face every day. So again, a reminder to our audience that you're invited to pose your questions in the Q&A feature at any time throughout the discussion today, and we're going to get to some of those after this section. So our first question is really to all of our panelists, and you can jump in if you have a strong opinion about this. Researchers can feel pulled in many directions. So we've already heard that from multiple of you here on this panel. That can include research, teaching, commercialization, public engagement, grant writing. So what needs to change at a system level to make early career roles more feasible, more sustainable, less stressful? Cindy, maybe you can kick us off.
Sure. So, I mean, it's funny. So I'm sitting here and it's so inspiring. Like everyone's speaking about commercialization and economic impact. And yes, great science really isn't enough anymore, is it? And it's inspiring, but at the same time, I found my hands getting really sweaty. And I don't know if any other ECRs are out there. All of a sudden, I'm like, how am I going to do that? Like, growing as I was doing my master's and my PhD, it used to be that you had to be really good at research, a bit of teaching, getting grants, getting money. And I think now it's like we've added commercialization, knowledge impact, knowledge mobilization, translation to that already long list of things that ECRs have to be excellent at, and we have to be excellent at them at the same time, like right away. I mean, right. And most of us don't get that training. Like I didn't get this training on how to even develop that lens to look at research in with this commercialization idea behind it. Like I just don't even know how to do that. And so I don't know. It's inspiring, but I do find it really overwhelming. And so, I mean, what can we do at a systems level? I mean, I guess one thing to do is start earlier exposure to these different expectations during like PhD training, even master's training, and not wait till we're already in our position to have to start to develop those skills, because it feels like it's almost too late now for me. I know it's not, but I just how. And then I think another thing would be, and I think Dr. Grant talked about this, or Dr. Bruno talked about this as well, is stop using those old metrics to evaluate us. We have to evolve. We know we're using different techniques now, or our outputs are different now. We need to start incorporate that into how we are viewed by our the committees that are going to give us tenure and whatnot. So yeah, I don't really have any other really great ideas how to change it yet.
So something that I've been looking into, right, is the DORA, right? So the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which has been adopted by, I think, quite a few institutions, as well as, Tri-Council. But I think that it's important to recognize that not all institutions have done it. Like I was looking into the University of Alberta, and there's nothing public there where they've notified anybody about actually like that. And so DORA is very much that's what Dr. Barra's talking about, a different way of evaluating the metrics or the outputs of our research. So those community engagements that I do and all the different things, and connecting with families, and we started an autism support group, right? And those little extras that are going to have, I think, maximum impact, especially in a community setting, traditionally would not have been able to be used for my evaluation committee when I'm going up for promotion, or I'm doing, all the different things that we have to do. We also, I think there's an extra level of scrutiny against early career researchers, right? We have to do at the University of Alberta anyways, a yearly evaluation where we have to put in all those little details, and we don't have that much research administrative support, and that takes a lot of time, and it's very tedious. And so I think at a structural level, more supports around those little administrative pieces would really help, because even getting funding set up takes, it's very tedious, and it takes a long time, because here in Alberta, a lot of our funding has been cut. And one of the first places they cut is from the financial services. And so getting funding established when it goes from a funder like what Mira's talking about, the Israeli Foundation, to a university is taking sometimes twice or three times longer than it used to, which has impact on somebody's career when you're measuring it in 5 years, right? And so there's little, I think, opportunities to at least start to think about how do we more efficiently get things across. Universities are notoriously slow. I recognize that, but that has to be taken into account when I'm going up for promotion, because I'm sitting here waiting for my funds. I can't spend anything. And in order for me to be able to spend stuff, that's how I get publications. And so there's almost this like cascade effect of it's impacting my career, but it's not being taken into account, I think, when I'm going up for evaluation.
Yeah, one thing I would just add is I totally agree on the points of needing to change the metrics, but I just, given experience that we've seen over several decades, it's not enough for a university or a hospital or a research institute to change those on their own. If the granting agencies don't also change them. Often what we see is that, when the granting agencies say, whether it's NSERC or SSHRC or CHR or others, the federal ones in particular, though, this is what we require of people, then that trickles down to the universities, because the universities then can kind of like blame mom and dad in a way, for making those changes. So when I chaired the NSERC Scholarships and Fellowships Committee and sat on the Discovery Grant, organizing committee, that's when we started to put in more requirements around EDI into those grants. Once that was in there and it's required for the grants, then of course it starts to get required at the university and hospital evaluation levels as well. So you have to make sure that there's an alignment there. And I think we can use our relationship with the federal granting agencies to help to almost guide us, but it's got to be sort of a two-way. Like we don't want those organizations just going off and do something that's not aligned, but we can also make use of the changes that they're making to help to support the changes that we want to see in those metrics in universities and hospitals.
Maybe I'd like to add, and I concur with everything that's been said, but to Cindy's point about, having to be knowledgeable and well-trained in all of those areas, I think it's totally unreasonable to expect from early career researchers that they'll be good in everything. And even for senior researchers, it doesn't have to be this way. So for me, it's not about simply adding new metrics to those that already exist, but it's about recognizing that there are different pathways to excellence, and it can be it doesn't have to be everything. And if as a researcher you want to focus on fundamental research, well, be it. But if you want to explore something different and the focus that you have is something else and involves more commercialization, translational research, then at least because of that in your career development. So I think it's having that flexibility that would be crucial in the system.
Yeah, maybe I'll add a couple of talking points. I also kind of agree with everybody here. Some of these are reflections, but like here in the med school, we kind of think about maybe 8 to 10% of people are going to be really enthusiastic about commercialization. And, the goal is to make it part of their pathway, part of their tenure and promotion reports, part of their performance reviews, to incorporate that in a more holistic way and make it available. And part of my office, our job is really to provide support and infrastructure so that maybe we can nudge that number up a little bit, but also it's not to make everyone a commercializer of their research. It's to provide the supports for the ones that are doing it and are enthusiastic about it and reduce some of the barriers. I thought about Cindy's point in like getting these, planting seeds about these principles earlier on in their career. One thing we did was I co-founded a course on commercializing neurotechnology as a graduate level that runs out of the institute here. And I found that been really helpful. We've seen lots of students. You can see a light bulb go off in their mind about different career opportunities and different passions they may have. So I do agree with getting in early. And then my last point was related to Allison's, which is the granting agencies 100% direct the university's behavior. And we've actually seen this. I know I'm speaking a lot through like a commercialization lens, and that's just one small piece of this conversation. But when we see in contracts that this money can be used for commercialization activities and we encourage that use, that makes it really challenging for the university to not allow that. So, for folks that are here from funding agencies, like that is very beneficial for folks that want to commercialize and for moving the needle a little bit. So I'll stop there.
Well noted. Amira, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. These are well noted, Erin. I guess I just want to say where I sit, from where I sit as a funder, I do really agree with Cindy's comments about how much we're asking from early career investigators in demonstrations in everything, in research, teaching, grant writing, mentorship, public engagement. It's all at once. And before there's really an opportunity to create the foundation for where those things will evolve. And we're asking early career researchers to be doing this while they're, in the back of their minds, their future long-term employment is sometimes in question. So this is maybe a tense side of this conversation. And I think what I'm hearing is maybe advocacy for a more phase appropriate support system for granting. Maybe not every early career researcher needs to be doing everything at every stage. And maybe funders like us can help by designing grants that that could give, the runway that they need for what they feel is most appropriate for their own research program.
Thank you. I know I think this kind of feeds into my next question, which is sort of Cindy, you kind of teed this off. Early career researchers told us that they crave stability, but they also want freedom to pursue their own scientific, bold ideas. So how can funders balance high risk, high reward funding, so this concept of high risk, high reward, with the need for predictable, sustainable support? Again, another, I think, aspect of stress for early career researchers, the sustainability issue, right?
Do you want me to go? I'm
Sure, Mira, go for it.
quite obviously a funder. So yeah, okay. That is actually precisely the right tension to be naming, and maybe what I can share is the foundation's perspective, where we made a sort of deliberate architectural choice to fund the full continuum, from fundamental neuroscience all the way to community services. But we don't require every researcher or project to kind of traverse the whole pipeline either. So our neurons to networks to neighborhoods framing is really about the portfolio and the networks that we generate through our portfolio of granting, but not about each individual grant, and not everything is required for each individual grant. So a researcher doing fundamental work on Fragile X genetics, for example, doesn't need to have a commercialization plan, but opportunities to develop that if they have it. And that's where the network comes in. So such a researcher really benefits from being part of an ecosystem where that translation is happening, so they can see that pathway if and when they're ready for it. So I think maybe a practical suggestion is to build commercialization exposure through networks and convening, or specific training opportunities, and in our case, not necessarily grant requirements. It's one of the reasons that we're already supporting training platforms like CanArt and the Clinical Trials Network for Neurodevelopment. And those networks can do that and connect researchers across the continuum so that these kinds of exposures can happen organically. And they can be exposed to, in fact, many of the opportunities that we've already heard on this call through relationships and not necessarily through mandatory deliverables.
Yeah, and I would add we're very much the same as Mira's approach. So that we do have these programs that go all the way from, say, TRL 3 all the way through 9, but not everyone has to do it. If you do it, you go faster for sure. But if you're an undergraduate student at a university or college, we've got a program for you to start learning about how this stuff works and start testing things out, dip your toes in the water a little bit. If you're a company that's looking for investment, we have programs there, both push and pull, which I think is also really critical. So it's not just about push it out. We sometimes are working with hospitals, long-term care homes, community centers. What is your pain point? And then connecting with other organizations that have got solutions. And I also really like, Mira's approach, which we would agree with. We're not just about funding new technologies. It's yes, some are products, but some are processes and some are programs, because I think we have to recognize the continuum of all of those. One of the other things, in the spirit of Mira mentioning these collaborative approaches, Inbal Itzhak is, I know, on the call, and she's representing the Canadian Consortium of Neurodegeneration and Aging, which is another way of, within these funding programs. This one's supported by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, connecting across different groups. But then we also have within, say, the dementia research and innovation space, we've now created a consortium, which is the and Mira and others can correct me when I get the name wrong, is the Dementia Research and Innovation Funders Alliance.
You got it.
Thank you. Okay, good. Which brings together, our groups and everyone else who's basically a funder in this space of research and innovation in dementia. And it's been very helpful for us in forming alliances and saying, how do we complement each other's funding? There's never going to be enough money to go for everyone to get what they want, to have the kind of sustainability that not just the organizations need, but that the people who rely on the organizations need. Because we're not here for ourselves. We're here to support the early career researchers and senior researchers and clinicians and others. But when we work together through those sorts of consortia, we can make the money go further by partnering. And I think that, again, partnering with Brain Canada has been really important in a lot of the work that everyone in that consortium is doing. Just sort of recognizing we don't all have to do everything. We can have our own sort of individual areas of focus, but when we put them together, then we can create a more sustainable ecosystem for all of the researchers and innovators.
Maybe I just want to highlight to add to what's been said, that I think across Canada, having opportunities to support research and collaborative research with non-dilutive grant is a fundamental way to actually share the risk, also associated with early development of very risky innovations, TRL 3 to 6. This is where at least we stand typically. So one thing I would mention, though, is that those opportunities will vary across provinces. It would be good to have more of that so that researchers could at the same time have their CIHR and do more fundamental research, and while simultaneously have those partnerships going on with industry, and while having much stability and not making the lab at risk while doing so. So I think those programs are really, really important to help researchers and companies take on a little more risk, actually, and share that risk with others.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we have tons of interest from the audience. You're clearly all very interesting people. So we're going to move next to the Q&A round because I want to carve out some time to answer those questions. But first, to the audience, please take a moment to answer the CSPC demographic poll that's going to come up on your screen soon. And in the meantime, we'll move forward with some of the audience questions. And so our first one, as a founder building in dementia care, one of the hardest challenges is getting early, meaningful feedback from caregivers and clinicians. So what advice would you give to early stage teams developing dementia-focused technologies on engaging caregivers and domain experts early on?
I can kind of speak to this because I just answered it in the Q&A in text. So, but the two things I'll say is in very practical means, like typically how companies would do this is bring on a clinician as high profile as you can leverage and put them on the cap table with maybe as an advisory level amount of equity. They're going to have skin in the game. They're going to be a lot more contributed. It's all about incentives in the real world. And if clinicians are busy, that would be one suggestion. My second is to explore a unique Canadian venture capital firm called Halo Health, which is backed by physicians and dentists. And actually, one of their unique offerings is that exactly is line of sight and direct kind of contact / mentor that has the domain knowledge in the clinical or dentistry space for your condition of interest. Those are my two suggestions.
Yeah, and I would add it's important to have folks that are providing support, but it's not just limited to clinicians, right? And so, as the question asks, it's also caregivers and people living with dementia or at risk for dementia, older adults especially. And so that's where Cabby's Leap initiative comes in. We've created a community of people. Some are people who are, we have the clinicians and also informal caregivers and formal caregivers, all kind of in one place, who have been trained specifically in how to interact with folks who are interested in developing innovations. Again, whether it's projects or programs or products, and specifically trained to interact with innovators at every stage of the innovation. And I think that, the advice that we give is interact with those end user communities early and often. It's never too early to start that engagement. It's a huge waste of time. You might think you've got the world's greatest idea, but if you don't check in with people to see, is this something that they might be interested in using, and get that advice early on, that's not going to be something that's worth investing all of your time in. But then even later on, they can give advice even before it comes time for beta testing. So all the way from sort of early conceptualization through alpha beta testing, all the way through helping to figure out how to design trials, intervention trials. And also, it's really important, we find the other group that gets ignored is not just the clinicians and caregivers, family members, but the people in charge of procurement down the road. The earlier you can get them on board, the better you will be able to design your trials to be able to make sure you're getting the right kind of results. Because I've seen so many companies, who come to us too late and have spent literally millions of dollars doing trials that aren't giving the kind of results that people are looking for when they're saying, I'm going to actually purchase this thing. So having all of those players at the table as early as possible is useful, and you don't have to create it yourself. So for dementia, aging, brain health, the LEAP program already has done that for people. And then there's many other groups around this table even who have other opportunities for engaging people, but really making sure also that you're getting to the right sorts of groups. So Grant could speak more about, if you've got a solution that's specific for Indigenous peoples, right, it's going to look quite different, and even if you're, working with, Cree Nation, or you're working with Métis, or you're working, with others, Mohawk, there's different sorts of needs and cultures. So you need to make sure that that's all addressed as early as possible.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of, again, I don't work in the space of dementia, but I do lead a program and a project called the Indigenous Caregiving Collective, which again is supported through the Israeli Foundation, which I'm always grateful for. And so what I've learned in the Indigenous space, especially, is that the parents and the caregivers who I get to work with, they're overwhelmed. They don't care about my research, and they don't have to. And that's never been the priority with me with them. Of course, I want to gather their experiences and their knowledge and their expertise so that it can help inform the work that I go with. But it's really important for me to understand those systemic challenges that they're facing, right? We have jurisdictional issues, right? So a lot of the disability supports we see are provincially funded, on reserve, or federal. So right then and there's a huge systemic challenge that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, right? Many of the caregivers I work with, again, are in survival mode completely. And so as researchers, we have this idea that, they should be a part of, my project. They should just show up. And a few things that I've learned is you have to go to them. Don't expect people to. You have to take the time, the initiative, the energy, and all those resources to them so that they can participate in an equitable way. And so some of the things that we've done is we provide respite to our caregivers. And so we've been able to build out a program now where it's like, yeah, we want to engage you, but we also want to give you a little time off as well. We want to be able to address something that is a fundamental need in our communities that isn't being addressed in any other space. And so, finding those opportunities to give back is critical. And that giving back often, as Aaron pointed out, has to be monetary compensation as well. Nobody wants to work for free. I always take the rule of you're basically consulting people. And so consultants, they charge $200, $300, $400, sometimes $500 an hour. So, when you think about, again, those systems that we have in place, especially at the university, where they don't want you giving more than $50 gift cards, you have to push back against that and say, this is worth it. This is their time, their knowledge and expertise is worth more than $50. It's, I usually do $100 for an hour. And so to again negotiate and advocate on behalf of the families that I work with, because again, you're up against this system, and the people that you want to work with, sometimes what they need doesn't align with that system as well.
Thank you all. Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important, and a key way in which we can, in a positive and people-centered way, engage our community, engage patient partners, people with living experience, where it's a two-way street. We're not just taking, we're also including. So another question from the Q&A. I think Cindy might have mentioned this, but we didn't really dig too much into it, which is the concept of knowledge mobilization, and that knowledge mobilization is not always the same as commercialization. So what are the challenges in this type of CAM work for brain health researchers?
Some of the challenges. I actually love doing knowledge mobilization. I love interacting with the community, and we do, in my first year in my position, we actually had a community event where it was for women and middle-aged women going through menopause, and we had like a heart health brain symposium. And the hardest part was just getting the funds. And I wanted it to be an interactive experience, so we had it in the community at this lovely community center that we have. I wanted it to be accessible, but of course it was in January and it's Calgary, so it could have been -40, and it ended up being +10. So, like the challenge was really just getting enough funding to make it interactive and important and impactful, and bring in speakers from different parts of the country to share their knowledge and their experiences. And I mean, that's always going to be a problem. So I don't have any solutions for that other than keep applying for funds. But it was a great experience, and we got videos made, and we had like testimonials from participants, and they're very powerful videos, and I can share them. That we have them on our website from the University of Calgary, the Momentum website. But it was really worthwhile, but definitely challenging. And I think one of the things I really learned from that was to give a closing out sort of feedback opportunity for everyone, not just the participants, but for the people that are involved in the organization and everything. We learned quite a bit from that. And so you can stretch a budget is what I also learned.
I'll add a little bit of this to this. I mean, I'm not a pure knowledge mobilization expert, but I found over my career that there's no replacement for just ongoing integrated communication with your PLEX population, with your population of lived experience. I was fortunate working at a spinal cord injury center that had care and community organizations and things to develop those relationships organically, but that's led into long-term sustained relationships. Like I have a standing meeting every Friday with the president of the Canadian Spinal Research Organization, and we just built a friendship over time. But then when it comes time to do your knowledge mobilization, you've had like already so much relevant input into the research that you're doing that you have, I think, a higher level of confidence that it's grounded in what the PLEX groups want to see happening, that it helps with all those barriers and makes them feel much organic at the latter stages. So maybe I'll stop there because it's not like a set plan, but I will encourage people to put the time aside to have like regular connections with your PLEX group that you're interested in supporting through research.
Yeah, and I would just add on the knowledge mobilization front, because Fiona, on different forms of knowledge mobilization, there's not one way of doing it. And I think as a cognitive neuroscientist, it's important to recognize that the way that people will best absorb information differs, right? So there's an individuality to it. So for example, in our Defy Dementia program, knowledge mobilization program, yes, we have a podcast, but like my mom won't listen to the podcast. She hates podcasts. So she will read a one-page infographic, right? So for each episode, we're creating infographics for people who prefer to take their information visually. For other people, we have like a 1-minute animated video. And then we have just like the traditional like resource page on the website. So you have to recognize also that different people are going to absorb the information best and access it best using different kinds of approaches. It is extremely time and labor and money intensive to do knowledge mobilization, right? Yes, as Erin said, you have to like have all the relationships. As Cindy said, you've got to, keep at it. And it's again, one of those things that it's not, it seems like it's easy to do, but to do it right, it takes a whole team. And so I think that's another place also where working together across different organizations, we can sort of combine efforts a little bit more. So we're talking about, for example, Fiona has a podcast, we have a podcast. Are there things we can do to have some cross-pollination, right? And other sorts of approaches for that. The other thing I just want to make sure everyone knows about, because I think it's one of Canada's most underappreciated gems in the funding ecosystem, is the NSERC Alliance Society program. And I'm biased because I'm just finishing this month my last few weeks as chair of the Public Value Impact Proposition Committee for it. It is really aimed at research that's being done that has an impact on Canada. And it doesn't have to be commercialization. In fact, if it's commercialization that benefits just one company, it's not eligible for funding through this. There's no matching funds required. It's the funding specifics are changing a little bit. It'll be up to $500,000 a year for up to 5 years. It's a way of bringing together partners, connecting with not just university or hospital researchers, but with community partners and things that are really going to make a difference in the world and especially in Canada. And so I'd really encourage everyone to take a look at all of the NSERC Alliance programs, but especially the Society program, because it's, it has rolling applications, so you can apply, whenever. And the committee meets every 2 months, so we're always looking at applications. The success rate is a lot higher than it would be, say, to get a CIHR, or a SSHRC or a traditional NSERC, if you address it in the right way and it's the right fit for you. So take a look at that. And then also, even if people are working in NSERC or CIHR spaces, taking a look at some of the SSHRC programs can be quite useful, because like the SSHRC partnership engage programs and other development programs often have this knowledge mobilization component really built right into it. So making sure that wherever you're applying for grants, whether it's Azrieli or KEBI or CIHR or wherever, make sure that you're setting aside some funding and enough funding for the knowledge mobilization elements. And that storytelling is just so important. If the politicians don't understand why what we're doing is important, we're not going to keep getting the funding to do what we need to do.
Thank you, Allison. And I think, storytelling is maybe the crux of knowledge mobilization, being able to communicate what we do effectively to the public and to our peers. I'm very mindful of the time. We only have a couple of minutes left. And I'm going to ask just one last question to the panel before we close, and maybe ask you to, it's a bit of a heavier one, but maybe ask you to keep your answers brief. What are your thoughts on the new $1.7 billion 13-year investment that the Government of Canada has announced to attract top scientists, international scientists, and bolster the research environment?
I'll stay very brief. So attraction is fantastic. Retention is also absolutely required. So we just need to make sure that we have measures to achieve both.
I would totally agree with Veronique, and I am, an import to Canada from the United States. Huge opportunity for us to attract people from outside Canada. Canada is unique in its ability to be able to support research. We really punch above our weight in terms of brain health research in particular, and brain research in general. And I think there's just tremendous opportunity, but we also have to make sure that the people that we have here now will be able to not just be retained, but have growing funding opportunities. So if we can find a way to balance that, I think that that's going to be an exceptional opportunity for us at this point in time.
And I'd love to hear a researcher's take on this. Aaron, maybe?
Yeah, similar to what's being said. I mean, I was surprised retention wasn't part of that system. Um, it's in human nature kind of feeling if you're at the level where you may be recruited for one of these that, hey, what about me? Maybe I should look, maybe this is the right time for me to go somewhere else. So I think it will achieve the recruitment goals of bringing in some top researchers, but it may create some darker sentiment on the folks that are already here and doing really well. So I think just retention should be maybe brought up at future cycles of this program and some more thought given to that. I also am interested in like the second and third level impacts of this type of grant because it will probably just logically create more pressure on our existing funding streams if we're bringing in, by definition, top researchers to the field. They'll be going into the same CIHR project grants and Brain Canada platform grants that everyone else is. So it will add additional pressure to the system, and I'm hoping that thought has been given to how that will be managed. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Mira, as our funder here, why don't I give you the last word?
Yeah, I think it was an important signal to allow Canada to position itself as a really top destination for research. I think all of us who have spoken about this have the same instinct that there are concerns around retention. And from my funder's perspective, I take it as a signal to enhance and promote some of those ecosystem building activities that that will be required to sort of fill the gaps that this kind of move creates. It will need more operating dollars. It will need a lot more systemic support. So we've noted it, and we're glad for it, and sort of understand and position ourselves to create the right retention environment as well.
Thank you all so much. And I'm sure this discussion is going to keep going along the networks that we've created all across Canada, in your homes, in your businesses, when you meet offline. So thank you to our panelists for your leadership on these topics and your candor. Today's themes, I think, were clear. We need stronger pathways, clearer supports, better mentorship, more inclusive structures, and intentional alignment between discovery, translation, and implementation. Our work at Brain Canada is made possible thanks to the Canada Brain Research Fund, so I would be remiss not to mention that, which is Brain Canada's unique arrangement with the Government of Canada through Health Canada and our more than 119 donors and partners. We hope this conversation supports a more resilient and self-sustaining future for Canadian brain research. For a glimpse into what the newest early career researchers supported by Brain Canada's Future Leaders program are studying, I have to plug this. Listen to our newest podcast, Bold Minds, Future Leaders in Canadian Brain Research. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts, and I believe there's also a link going in the chat. And thank you all for joining us today. It's been fantastic. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.